Hello friends! In this occasion, I will explain about approach, method and technique, changing means and shifting sense, the grammar translation method, Gwyn and the series method, and the last, direct method. The first step toward developing a principled approach to language teaching will be to turn back the clock about a century to learn from the historical cycles and trends that have brought us to the present day. This chapter focuses on methods as the identifying characteristic of a century of modern language teaching efforts. Before we explain the methods, you should know the meaning of approach, methods, and technique. According to Edward Anthony, approach is a set of assumptions dealing with the nature of language, learning, and teaching, while method is described as an overall plan for systematic presentation of language based upon a selected approach. And technique is the specific activities manifested in the classroom that were consistent with method and therefore were harmony with an approach as well. Next is changing winds and shifting sense. Albert Marquardt saw this changing winds and shifting sense as a cyclical pattern in which new methods emerge about every quarter of a century. Each method broke from the old but took with it some of the positive aspects of the previous practices. Jadi, changing winds and shifting sense ini adalah pola siklus di mana muncul metode baru setiap 1/4 abad. Nah, setiap metode baru terlepas dari metode lama, tapi membawa aspek-aspek positif dari metode sebelumnya. Contohnya ada pada audiolingual method atau disingkat dengan ALM yang muncul pada pertengahan abad ke-20. Nah, ALM ini meminjam atau membawa prinsip dari metode sebelumnya yaitu direct method hampir setengah abad. Next is the grammar translation method. Firstly, this method, known as classical method, which focused on grammatical rules, memorization of vocabulary and of various declensions and conjugations, translation of text, and doing written exercises. But in the 19th century, the classical method came to be known as the grammar translation method. Several characteristics of the grammar translation method are: classes are taught in the mother language with little active use of the target language. Jadi, guru mengajar dengan bahasa ibu dengan menggunakan sedikit bahasa target, seperti misal guru di Indonesia mengajar bahasa Inggris, dia menggunakan bahasa Indonesia dengan sedikit bantuan dari bahasa Inggris, seperti itu. Next, a long elaborate explanation of the intricacies of grammar are given. Jadi di metode ini tuh guru menjelaskan mengenai grammar dengan penjelasan yang panjang dan rumit. Next is Gwyn and the series method. This method is proposed by François Gwyn. The series method was created a method that taught learners directly with the translations and conceptually with the grammatical rules and explanation. The series of connected sentences that are easy to perceive. The last is direct method. The basic premise of the direct method was similar to that of Gwyn's series method. namely that the second language should be more like first language. Lots of oral interactions, spontaneous use of the language, no translation between first and second language, and little or no analysis of grammatical rules. Well, maybe that's all from me. Thank you, and let's listen to the next speakers.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello everyone, my name is Ayunda Salsabila and I'm from PBI 4A. This material is about the audiolingual method in page 22. In the first half of 20th century, the direct method did not take hold in the US the way it did in Europe. While one could easily find native-speaking teachers of modern foreign language in Europe, such was not the case in the US. Moreover, U.S. educational institutions had become firmly convinced that a reading approach to foreign language was more useful than an oral approach. The highly influential Coleman Report, Coleman 1929, had persuaded foreign language teachers that it was impractical to teach oral skills and that reading should become the focus. Then World War II broke out, and suddenly the U.S. was thrust into a worldwide conflict, heightening the need for Americans to become orally proficient in the language of both their allies and their enemies. The U.S. military provided the impetus with funding for special intensive language courses that focus on oral skills. These courses came to be known as the Army Special Training Program, or more correctly, the Army Method. The characteristic of these courses was a great deal of oral activity, pronunciation and pattern drills, and conversation practice with virtually none of the grammar and translation found in traditional classes. In all its variation and adaptation, the Army Method came to be known in the 1950s as the audiolingual method. There are 12 the characteristics of ALM adapted from Prater and Sales Murcia 1979. First, new material is presented in dialogue forms. Second, there is dependence on mimicry, memorizations of set phrases, and overlearning. Third, structures are sequenced by means of contrastive analysis and thought at the time. Fourth, structural patterns are taught using repetitive drills. Fifth, there is a little or no grammatical explanation. Grammar is taught by inductive analogy rather by deductive explanation. 6. Vocabulary is strictly limited and learned in context. 7. There is much use of tabs, language labs, and visual aids. 8. Great importance is the take to pronunciation. 9. Very little use of the mother tongue by teachers is permitted. 10. Successful responses are immediately reinforced. 11. There is a great effort to get students to produce error-free utterance. And the last is, there is a tendency to manipulate language and disregard content. Method can be called success could be overtly experienced by students as they practiced their dialogue in off hours. But the popularity was not to last forever, because challenged by Wilgar Rivers at 1964, eloquent criticism of the misconception of the aim by its ultimate failure to teach long-term. Next material is cognitive code learning in page 24. Cognitive code learning methodology, C. Carroll 1966, began to inject more deductive role learning into language classes. Increasing interest in generative transformational grammar and focus attention on the rule-governed nature of language and language acquisition lead some language teaching programs to promote a deductive approach rather than the inductivity of the aim. Cognitive code learning was not so much a method as it was an approach that implies a conscious awareness of rules and their application to second language learning. It was a reaction to the strictly behavioristic practices of the aim and ironically a return to some of the practices of grammar translation. As teachers and materials developers saw that in sense parroting of potentially root material was not creating communicatively proficient learners, a new twist was needed, and cognitive code learning appeared to provide just such a twist. Unfortunately, the innovation was short-lived, for as surely as root-dwelling board students offered cognitive attention to the rules paradigma in 3 cases, and a section of a language overtakes the mental reservoir of language students. The profession needed some space and verve, and innovative minds in spirited 1970 were up to the challenge. This material is about designer methods of the spirited at 1970 in page 24. The decade of the 1970s was historically significant on 2 counts. First, perhaps more than in other decades in modern language teaching history, research on second language learning and teaching grew from an offshoot of linguistics to a discipline in its own right. As more and more scholars specialize their effort in second language acquisition studies, our knowledge of how people learn language inside and outside the classroom mushroom. Second, in this spirited atmosphere of pioneering research, a number of innovative, if not revolutionary, methods were conceived. These designer methods, to borrow a term from Noonan at 1989, were some marketed by entrepreneurs as the latest and great application of the multidisciplinary research finding of the day.
Hello everyone, my name is Fadlana Shada Priyanka, and in this special occasion I would like to present about community language learning, and the second one about Suggestopedia, the third one is about the silent way, and the fourth one is about TPR or total physical response, and the last one is the natural approach, community language learning. Charles Talon in 1972 said that this method is create a classic example of an effectively based method. And he said this is a counseling learning. And in here, a social dynamic such a group were primarily important. And the methodology is the student or the clients were seated in a circle, and then the counselor on the outside of the circle. And as they talk, the counselor translate into the second language or English language, and then the students repeat it as accurately as possible. But there is the advantage and disadvantage of this method. The first one, we have the advantage. The teacher allows the students to determine the type of conversation, and disadvantage of this method is the teacher would become non to directive, because in the fact the student need the directive conversation, the directive learn, especially in their first stage because I see that the student in the first stage seemingly have the struggle in foreign language. Okay, next we have Suggestopedia. A Bulgarian psychologist named Georgy Luzanev in 1979 believed that the human brain could process a great quantities of the material if given in the right condition, which are state of a relaxation or giving the control of the teacher. But I think the right condition may not be available wherever this method was taught, like the using of the music and comfortable chairs, because it will replace the understanding process in language learning by memorization techniques. Next, we have the silent way. Caleb Gatenio in 1972 said that learning is facilitated if the learner discovers and creates rather than remembers and repeat what is to be learned. But I think this method is too harsh because the teacher too distant with the students. Maybe like this, the teachers is get out of my way while the students work out for the solution. Next, we have total physical response. According to James Azar at 1977, said that the instructor as the director of the stage play in and the student as the actors. Maybe like this. TPR is like the student did a deal with listening and acting, like this. If I'm as a teacher, I will be like I will pronounce or talk about drink, and also the teachers use the real things like this bottle, and the students do the same thing. They hold the bottle to like drink 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 like this. So that is the reason why the TPR is usually said that the students as an actor. And don't forget, TPR has their own disadvantage too, like in writing and reading activities, the students were limited to spinning off the oral work in classroom, like that. So every method has their own disadvantage and their own advantage. And the last one, we have the natural approach. Stephen Krasn in 1982 and 1997 said that the teacher should provide the basic of comprehensible input, communication skills for everyday language situation. And in this method, the learners don't say during this silent period until they feel free to do so. And in this method, there are three stages of the natural approach. The first one is the development of listening skills, and the early stage is usually marked by the errors as the student struggles with the language, and the last stage is the usually promote the fluency. But there is disadvantage of this stage too, like the heavy emphasis on comprehensible input and the silent period. And what about the students whose speech never emerged? Or how does one know which structures the learners are to be provided with?
The last material is about Beyond Method National Functional Syllabus in page 32. National Functional Syllabus is the innovative methods of the 1970s were being touted by some and criticized by many. Some significant foundation for the future growth, beginning with the work of the Council of Europe, Van Eyck and Alexander at 1975, and later followed by numerous interpretations of national syllabus of Wilkins at 1976 and National Functional Syllabus, hereafter referred to as NFS, began to be used in the United Kingdom in the 1970s. It is important to emphasize in this historical sketch of methodology that the NFS did not necessarily develop communicative competence in learners, and you can see the table on page 34 and 35 as an aid to your recollection of the characteristic of some of the method reviewed earlier. You may wish to refer to table 2.1 in page 34 and 35, in which the audiolingual method, the five designer methods, and the communicative language teaching approach are summarized according to each different criteria.